Thank you so much for the chance to be with you by recording. I'm very sorry that Storm Stella made it impossible for me to get to Tennessee. We were watching the weather for over a week, and when they started canceling flights Sunday night for flights on Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday morning, it seemed that a big storm was on the way. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you in this way, and I hope that you're having a very good conference. I can only imagine the dogwoods potentially on the way out. At least the daffodils are blooming in the state of Tennessee. Before I start, and I'm honored to be able to close the conference, but before I start, I always wanted to begin that I'm speaking to you from the Yale Child Study Center, but I want to begin to tell you that I come to this story and to this presentation in a very personal way. I am a native of Franklin County, Tennessee. I grew up in Franklin County, Tennessee, went to school there. I then went to medical school in Vanderbilt, and as illustrated on the slide, made my journeys also through the University of the South at Sewanee, Vanderbilt, and then to Yale, where I spent much of my career. In the last years, though, I've had the special honor and privilege to be working back home, back in Grundy County with close friends and colleagues there on a project called Discover Together, and back in Sewanee doing things around teaching and engaging students in our state and in helping our state. So for me, this is very much a personal journey of giving back, and the opportunity to be here and to talk to you this afternoon is also very much that giving back. I want what's best for our state and what's best for the children of our state. With that in mind, I would ask you to imagine how I've also in the past have had two opportunities to speak here in Tennessee, and each time have asked audiences to imagine these questions. What would our state's future and our children's future be like? What's that future that we want to imagine? What can we do to make that future possible for all the children of the state of Tennessee? How can we anticipate the challenges to our vision and to our children's future? And how can we do our best to prevent or reduce those challenges? And that's what we're about today, and that's what you've been about as you've been coming to these sessions. I know that you've been talking about adverse childhood experiences. You've been talking about how we build a brain and how we impact children. I want to just set the frame by talking about, just briefly set that frame around what I know that you have over time and over these last 2 days been speaking about. First, you know that the foundations of prosperity and sustainable prosperity actually begin in early childhood. It's not just that doing things for children is good, it sets the stage for lifelong health and lifelong prosperity, economic, productivity, work satisfaction, nurturing parenting, and indeed a just and fair society and healthy communities. A lot to put on a young child, but it is where the foundation begins, is in early childhood. I also know that you've had this sense, you've begun with the metaphor of a strong foundation built in healthy child development, and as illustrated in this schematic, all the things that occur on that foundation. And the principles, the three core concepts that should be at the forefront of your thinking now and your awareness is that brain architecture is established early in life and supports lifelong health, behavior, and physical health. That stable, caring relationships and what we call a serve and return between a caregiver and a child shape brain architecture in very real structural and functional ways. And that what we call toxic stress, early childhood adversity, can derail healthy development. Those are the three principles that you would hold in mind as you have been learning over this time together. The foundations of healthy development healthy development in early childhood set the foundations for lifelong outcomes, including health-related behaviors, educational achievement, economic productivity, physical and mental health, and both through impact on genes, impact on environment, impact on caring, early adversity can change that trajectory. Serve and return We cannot talk enough about it. Serve and return, those moment-to-moment regular interactions between a parent and a child shape the brain. They are key. They include babbling, facial gestures, and the way adults respond to what a child or a baby says. These serve and return interactions are absolutely essential, and they support the quality of the relationship and also support, again, the development of brain architecture. Relationships are key. The ability to change brains also decreases over time, and that's another very important principle for you to carry forward. What we call brain plasticity, or the ability to remodel that architecture, is influenced by experience and begins to decrease over time. Likewise, or conversely, the amount of energy, the amount of effort required for learning, for change, increases over time. So there's a greater amount of effort required for new neural connections. When we talk about toxic stress, it's just to remind you that we're talking about 3 levels of stress around development. First is positive. All of us have those moments of positive stress, just a bit out of our comfort zone, you might think about it. And it is in those moments that we actually learn. We're not in that regular stress state all the time. We come back to a baseline and we learn from that challenge. Tolerable stress, when we lose someone, when there's a major snowstorm coming and you can't get to where you're supposed to be. All of those are tolerable stresses that may stay with us a bit longer, and maybe we don't learn quite as much during them, but nonetheless we manage them. Because we have good colleagues that let us send recordings of our presentation. We have good colleagues that help us, and friends and family around times of loss. Toxic stress is what we're most worried about for children, when their stress system is hyper aroused and there's no one to help them bring it back down. There's no one to comfort them. There's no one to assure them that things are safe. And the brain is then bathed in stress hormones for a long amount of time, which instead of being a learning experience and promoting growth, actually stunts growth and is damaging to the brain. You've seen this slide, I would guess, in other presentations, that toxic stress changes brain architecture. It changes the connections between the brain, among the neurons in the brain. It damages the connectivity across. Significant adversity, again, ACEs, significant adversity in the first years of life impairs development. So on this slide, which I hope is now becoming familiar, if you take the number of risk factors on an ACEs scale and you just add them up, the more you get, the more likely they are to have developmental delays in early childhood. And this goes even into adulthood, where the risk for adult heart disease appears to be embedded in the number of early childhood adversities experienced by children. What are those sources of early childhood adversity? You know now, you've been familiar, you're becoming aware of the ACEs, the list of adverse childhood experiences. Others would add things depending on neighborhoods and communities like chronic homelessness, but these are the list. And most commonly, the sources across our country include maltreatment, postpartum depression or unremitting depression, where the caregiver, the parent, the mother is not able to care for the child, and parental substance use, the more common ones. So that's what you've heard, and you've become quite aware about ACEs, and you're thinking a lot about it, and you're thinking about it, I hope now, as a public health issue, that we need to do what we can to remit that kind of barrier to children reaching their fullest potential. But ACEs are not destiny. And they're not destiny because some children are more susceptible than others to toxic stress for a host of reasons, including genetic. There can be other adults that can serve a buffering, caring role that may minimize or at least reduce the impact. There is a capacity to repair across development so that an early adverse set of experiences is not necessarily written as fate. Remember plasticity. And perhaps most importantly for today, interventions can make a difference. And that's what we're going to spend some time on in the next few minutes. You have been working around awareness. That's what the Tennessee campaign is for now. It is making people more aware of how early experience shapes brain architecture, how important early experience is for lifelong health, and how ACEs or adverse childhood experiences can derail lifelong health. But now that awareness should inform action, action should inform creative solutions, then you evaluate the outcomes, which comes back to inform awareness. So what I want to talk a lot about now is now those steps that are in green, the action and the creative solutions, and how we think together. Having become more aware, how do we think together? Awareness is absolutely key to prevention and more informed intervention. Or as a very famous quote from Frederick Douglass, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken ones, even as good as our science is about repair. If you think about the levels of intervention, in the green are what we might call primary prevention, that we deliver on a population basis. Fluoride in the water is an example of a population-based intervention. Immunizations are an example. Secondary in the yellow is when we think risk factors are present, such as ACEs. What would we do additionally? How would we be sure that those children at risk for poor outcomes or impaired outcomes are getting what they need in addition to what the population needs? And tertiary is where we're all familiar, intervening where there's abuse, neglect, or other adverse circumstances. Where we want to be as a state and where we should be as a state is in the green. That's where we should be as a society, is in the green. And in the yellow as well, thinking about those individuals who need a bit more, kind of personalized care, personalized medicine that you're starting to hear about. If someone needs more because of their experience or because of their genes, what more is it? But we want to be in the green and the yellow, and as little in the red as we can be. We actually already have solutions that work. And one of the things that's quite remarkable, not just in behavioral developmental health, but across health, is how long it takes our science that's informed these solutions, how long it takes it to disseminate out into use and out into the communities that need it. So we have solutions that work, and that's what I want to begin to get you to think about. The other piece I'd like to bring you in is to think about an ecological model of development, originally brought forward by Bronfenbrenner, where the inner circle, the mesosystem that Bronfenbrenner called our attention to, with the child at the center, but also involves daycare, it involves health care, it involves the family, it involves education, it involves all those systems around an individual child. Then the circle beyond that, again, involves larger systems, the law, the legal system, the school arrangement or school systems, workplace, the community, and beyond that, in what Bronfenbrenner called the macro system, actually involves culture. But as you can get a sense that that center circle is not just the individual intervention, it's things happening that are all around the child. And I would suggest that when we start to think about reducing, preventing the impact of early childhood adversity, we talk about a circle somewhat like this, where there's individual child, family, parent programs, but there's schools and child care, there's health care, there's workforce and economic development, there's community development, and all of those interact with each other to impact families and children. And when we start to think about interventions or prevention programs, it is important that we talk about prevention at the level of individual, but we also need to think how each of these systems or each of these areas impacts that individual, and think how we bring our interventions together in new and innovative ways. These systems don't often talk to one another, and that's where we have the opportunity to be different. So I'm going to take just a few examples from each of these areas and show you what we already know. And these will really just be small examples, and then conclude with a challenge to us as a state of how we organize in a different way. So first, working at the level of child and parent, which would be something I think that most of us would be quite familiar with. I need to bring you in to another piece of science, if you will, and that is that we're increasingly understanding how a parent's care of a child is then transmitted when that child becomes an adult. That child parents as they were parented. That's been an old saying, if you will, among clinicians and families, just like his dad, doing just like or she's just like her mom. But now we're beginning to understand some of the basic biology of how certain key aspects of parenting behavior, nurturing behavior, is truly transmitted across generations and how that happens. Given that, I would suggest that while we're all very comfortable when we think about children intervening at the level of child, I would suggest that there are some intervention themes emerging from the basic science of early parenting, if you will, that extend beyond parent education. We're very comfortable when we intervene with a child and family to be telling a parent what their child needs. But I'm suggesting that as we understand more about how early experience is transmitted to the next generation, we need to focus more on adult development as a parent and building adult capacity. We need also to recognize the long-term effect of early adversity on the adult transition to parenthood. It's not just that early adversity in ACEs impacts health and impacts well-being in children as adults, but it also impacts how they parent, and hence becomes a factor in the intergenerational transmission of parenting behaviors. And we need to think about in multi-generational terms, because we're often working and putting prevention efforts in with families who have long histories of trauma that goes past generations. So thinking about how do we interrupt that cycle and how do we actually impact the environment around the child. And I would suggest a new theory of change. And I put new in quotes because it's actually not that new. You've often talked about working with parents. But perhaps talking about it in this way is new, that what we need to do is not just help parents learn what their child needs, but help parents gain skills that will in turn help them be better parents. So build adult capacity. And that adult capacity can be around workforce development, it can be around education, but build capacity. And that in turn, building an adult capacity impacts child outcomes. We often think, sometimes we think the reverse, that help the child and the parent will come along, suggesting that this is actually a cycle. Build adult capacity comes then to improve child outcomes. By improving child outcomes, then you then have the long-run view, long-term view, that helps that child be a better parent. So I'm just going to give you some examples of some interventions that have been around for a while, actually a number of them, where actually this is the frame. This is the frame that you actually are helping build adult capacity in a prevention-intervention way of thinking. So the first is the nurse-family partnership, which you probably know or have heard of, a very well-researched, robust intervention that we know is effective, that targets low-income first-time mothers through nursing home visits. The goal, as you can read on the slide, is to improve pregnancy outcomes because the interventions start in pregnancy, improve child health and development, and also to give parents some basic skills for self-sufficiency, especially economic. There have been a number of trials of the program. The one I'll give you some data from that's well published by David Oles and his colleagues is the one that happened in Memphis, and you can see that the Memphis trial was the biggest of the three. In the Memphis, there's been consistent results across the trials, but there have been improvement in women's prenatal health, reductions in children's injuries, so reduction in ACEs-like experiences, fewer subsequent pregnancies, greater intervals between births, increases in fathers' involvement, increases in employment by mothers and fathers, and reductions in welfare and food stamp dependency and improvement in school readiness for children. Those are across the 3 trials. The Memphis program, specifically, had a remarkable reduction in injuries, in childhood injuries. As you can see on the slide, a 23% reduction in child and healthcare-related encounters for injuries, and an 80% reduction in days hospitalized for injuries. These are trial data. The enduring effects in Memphis, just in the Memphis sample alone, as you can read, 31% fewer close-spaced pregnancies, 3.6 fewer months on welfare, so greater economic sufficiency, 30% fewer subsequent admissions to a neonatal ICU after delivery. So these are actually remarkably positive, good outcomes from a home visiting program that is quite enduring and quite robust. There's also growing effects on child development across time and a 6-year follow-up with children involved in this intervention that you can read. Better language, fewer mental health problems. One can think of the nurse-family partnership as truly a preventative intervention that gives families, gives parents more adult skills, which then in turn impacts children for the long term. We also think about helping parents at interconnected levels. So I've been talking about skill building, but we talk about parental mental health, impacting mental health, and social connectedness. And with that in mind, I want to tell you about 2 other interventions that again focus on adult skill building, but bringing these together. Minding the Baby is a program developed here in New Haven, which again relies on home visiting during the mother's pregnancy, but in this case brings 2 professionals together, a nurse and an infant mental health trained social worker. And the focus of this intervention, just as intensive as the nurse-family partnership, but the focus is also to give mothers, parents, skills in emotion regulation and how to respond to stress, and also skills in the ability to read what their baby needs, and also to think about what their own role as a parent that they need. It's a 27-month home visitation program. The visits begin in the 3rd trimester. As you can see, they're every other week from 12 to 24 months, but they're weekly up until that time. It's a very flexible service delivery model, so going to where the mother needs the 2 clinicians to be, and a flexible use of a variety of curricula and intervention approaches, again, depending on what the parent needs. Data about the effectiveness is improved health and relationship outcomes for the intervention families, including higher rates of on-time pediatric immunization, so attending to the child's health care needs, lower rates, just like in the nurse-family partnership, of rapid subsequent childbearing, lower rates of child protection referrals, higher rates of secure attachment, lower rates of disorganized attachment, and further evidence as there's increase in mothers' ability to think reflectively about what their child needs, especially among the more vulnerable, the younger teenage adolescent mothers. And there's lower levels of maternally reported behavioral problems in the child and follow-up, and that follow-up is around 4.5 to 5 years. So sustained effects, again, just as in the nurse-family partnership. Let me also tell you about the New Haven Moms Partnership, which is a program under the direction of our colleague Megan Smith, who has also had the opportunity to speak in Tennessee and is very involved with me in thinking about the Tennessee work. The Moms Partnership offers some innovations over both Minding the Baby and the Nurse-Family Partnership in these ways. First off, the Moms Partnership uses community mental health ambassadors, uses women from the community, trained in developmentally appropriate interventions, trained in ways of working with parents. So it's a way of extending the workforce, if you will, and be a way of being able to reach individuals and also being able to reach individuals in a culturally sensitive way. The other part about the Moms Partnership is what Megan calls innovation in location, that services are provided where families come. They aren't required to come to a clinic or necessarily required to meet the clinician at home, but where they come. So for example, Here in New Haven, Megan and her colleagues have established a wellness center at a local supermarket that gave them space, where many, many families come, and gave them space to actually build a wellness center so that families recognized the mom's partnership when they came to buy food for their family. The supermarket even gave them a room upstairs where families can meet together with clinicians. So it's an innovation in location and using community members, especially trained, to deliver services. The mom's partnership shows promise in reducing maternal depression. So on this slide, what you want to actually look at is if you take before treatment, women referred for depression, 100% referred, or 100% depressed because they were referred for it. There is a natural attrition in individuals who don't receive a treatment, so it goes down a bit, or a natural diminishment of depressive symptoms. But with the mom's partnership, what you're looking at is this 62% decrease in depressive symptoms. 62% of families with moms, 6 months follow-up, have a significant decrease in depressive symptoms. And there's a cost analysis here to show you the cost savings in that intervention, which would actually be very important to funders such as the state or other funders. Looking at parenting scales such as parenting stress, the mom's partnership again shows after 8 sessions, which is what this first column is, the 8 sessions, and then 6 months later shows a significant decrease in reported parenting stress, and conversely a significant increase in the report of positive parenting experiences. This PRFQ is the parental reflective functioning, or the ability to think about what you need or you're feeling and your child is feeling. And there is a significant increase in follow-up of parents feeling curious, wanting to be engaged more with their child. And remember, serve and return. That is the quality of serve and return. Looking further though at the moms across several cohort studies, mother's treatment and mother's response on treatment is associated with improvements in the child in internalizing symptoms such as anxiety, and also improvements in working memory and mental flexibility. I'll show you those data in just a minute. The treatment of maternal depression also predicted improvement in school attendance, as well as mother-child relationships. So remember again what we called our new theory of change, that you're improving maternal mental health, improving maternal adult capacity, which is then coming to impact the child in positive ways. And this is just one example of how the mom's partnership with an improvement in maternal depression or building adult capacity impacts the child's function on these basic kind of executive function, or what you might call air traffic control skills in the brain. Being able to learn, being able to learn in working memory, learn something and hold it in memory. And the go, no-go task looks at the ability to inhibit a response. Both very, very important to learning, and you can see quite significant effects for children whose mothers participated in the intervention. I want to turn now, if you remember that triangle that I showed you, which was adult mental health, adult skill building, and social connectedness, and turn to how we now are beginning to understand how to build social networks among parents, which in turn builds adult capacity. And just to remind you, this is a quite old quote now, that nearly 30 years old actually, but that social capacities, building social networks, or the lack thereof, are major risks to health. Social isolation is associated with a range of problems, including hypertension, even high cholesterol, even increased cigarette smoking or addiction. And it's associated, social isolation has an impact as bad as those things, but it is definitely associated with poor health. So how do social networks affect health? One is social influence. So you might think around smoking, for example, that if you are in a network of individuals who smoke, you're more likely to smoke. And there's intriguing data too about even the transmission of obesity around networks and how does that work. Social engagement, maybe person-to-person contact might affect health in that way. Access to resources, your network has more access to community parks, for example, and the provision also of social support and the relation to stress regulation. Any number of these ways that social networks might affect health, but we know that having a healthy social network is an important health outcome. So we've created an app that we call Mamba. And the purpose of Mamba, and one can use it on a smartphone, and we did a number of focus groups to find out that many families, a startlingly high number of families, low-income families, nonetheless still actually have smartphones and use smartphones regularly. And so the goal of Mamba is to connect new mothers to each other, so to start to build that network, to actually give them information about their infants and to build an attachment, to connect them to local resources, to information about health and the health of their own baby, and then to incentivize pro-social or adult capacity building behaviors. And we incentivize them by giving them challenges such as meet up with another mom in the park and take a walk with your babies, and they win points which they can then use for a range of things, such as buying something for their baby themselves, or pooling their points together with their network and their friends and buying something for everyone. Impact of Mamba, as you can see on this slide, is that the maternal sensitivity to the infant or children is going up. It's higher in the intervention. The Mamba group also has a significantly higher social network score. That is, they get together more and they identify more friends. There's clinically significant decreases in depression, depressive symptoms, and reported parenting stress, and an improvement in their thinking about their baby before they deliver, what we call maternal fetal attachment. Just in doing focus groups, moms also say that they have an elevated mood and they have a greater feeling of self-efficacy being a part of this virtual network. There's an exchange of resources that they find quite important and helpful. And perhaps most striking, they begin to talk about a decrease in stigma. A decrease in stigma about poverty, a decrease in stigma about not having access to resources because they begin to be able to help one another and be with each other. So we're encouraged about the use of Mamba, but the reason to point it out is we're also in a very technological world. And there is the opportunity to begin, especially in a very rural state, a point I will make more later, to begin to build on technology. Technology never replaces interpersonal contact, but to build on technology as a way of reaching and helping families. So working at the level of the school, I don't need to say a huge amount about that, but I do want to give you an overview of what we already know about the importance of education. First, we know that there's tremendous economic return on quality preschool education. This is work by Heckman, and as you look at this slide, what you see is that when preschool education, there is a far greater return in adulthood on that investment, or what you might call human capital investment, a far greater return in work productivity in those individuals as adults, and economic stability with preschool programs. It doesn't diminish with college. It doesn't go to zero with college and job training, but there's a far greater impact the earlier we begin. Let me just put these up for you. Sorry. That if you compare early learning participants, and this is a summary, I've given you the references at the bottom. This is a summary across a number of studies of children participating in early learning environments. And you can see that there's a positive impact on language, a positive impact on peer relationships. They're more likely to graduate from high school, more likely to attend a four-year college, and less likely to require remedial education, compared to, as you see on the other side, children who don't have the opportunity to be engaged with other children in preschool programs, more likely to not attend college, and perhaps even more concerning, quite likely to be arrested or involved in criminal activity, especially if they come from lower economic circumstances. Preschool education has a profound impact. But as we think about being innovative and bringing services together, one of the things we need to think about is how are we investing in early childhood education? And I just wanted to give you a little bit of data about the average salary, both nationally and in the state of Tennessee, for child care workers compared to Head Start teachers, compared to preschool teachers, and you see up to elementary school teachers. The top line is the national median, the second line is the state of Tennessee. And then compared to other professions. And as you see, teachers, elementary and secondary and preschool teachers are below a number of other professions. These are national average data. And for comparison, I've given you the federal poverty level for a family of 4 in 2017. So you can see that, at least in our state, preschool teachers are on average paid below the federal poverty level for a family of 4. In order to have quality preschool education that we know has the enduring effects that I showed you, we need to invest in a workforce. We need to professionalize this workforce. It is an investment. It is as serious an investment as your child's pediatrician. So this is just a point of policy and a point that we need to keep in mind as we think of innovation. Working through pediatric practice and healthcare systems, there's a very, very complicated system to work through, but I just want to give you one example of an intervention that has proved remarkably successful through pediatric practices, and that's Reach Out and Read, that you may know about. In Reach Out and Read, volunteers come to waiting rooms to read aloud to children. The books are provided for a child at every health visit, beginning at 6 months through 5 years. And the data on Reach Out and Read, which was founded in 1989, you can see the number of families served now annually across the country, and that it reaches by and large 1 in 4 low-income families. For the studies that have been done, receptive and expressive vocabulary scores are higher in the older intervention toddlers. There's significant improvement in vocabulary scores both for words that appear in the books and not. And preschool language development is improved on average by an age equivalent of 3 to 6 months for children participating in Reach Out and Read. Perhaps even more or equally important is parents reporting the frequency of reading aloud to their children and the number of days per week for the intervention or the Reach Out and Read group in orange and the control group in yellow. And you can see a significant increase both in days per week and in nights per week. And then parents' attitudes toward reading. That for the Reach Out and Read group on this side of the slide, the Reach Out and Read group, 1 out of 3 of the favorite activities that parents cite, and similarly a favorite activity for children. Reach Out and Read is a remarkably simple intervention embedded in pediatric care, embedded in health care. Now the other point I would talk or advocate for working through health systems is actually integrate the health data as an index of efficacy in psychological interventions. And you heard some of that in the nurse-home family partnership in terms of health. You heard it in Minding the Baby in terms of immunizations. But these are data that actually are very important to include when we think about those individual family interventions. Prenatal care, perinatal outcomes, birth weight, emergency room utilization, use of well child care, indices of growth, rates of asthma. And why those aren't always integrated into our evaluation outcomes is that it's two systems often. It's the health system, and it might be the educational system, or an intervention happening outside the health system. We'll talk a little bit later about the innovations that we need to bring these data systems together, but using health data to evaluate the efficacy of child interventions is key. Remember, we talk about early adverse experiences impact lifelong health, early positive experiences impact lifelong health, so we need to think about health data. Just briefly on economic reform and workforce development, another system that impacts child health. Poverty impacts development in a number of ways. Lack of access to basic needs for children, basic medical care, lack of jobs. None of these are a surprise to you. Tremendous income disparity. When there is a visible evidence of disparity in income, causes stress for families. That's another way that poverty impacts outcome. The highest poverty states, as you can see, some of the southern states, Mississippi, Kentucky, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Tennessee, these are 2012-2013 data, are among the higher poverty states. Also, we can improve, there's data that suggests to improve maternal mental health or to improve family economic security, which one has the bigger impact? And this is a very intriguing set of studies, or a study in 2010, where if you increase economic security in a family, it also improves depression. And conversely, improving depression does increase economic security. But for both, there's a cognitive gains in children as a result either of treating the maternal depression or as a result of increasing the family household income. So small gains in household income have impact on child as well as family well-being. There's data from the Great Smoky Mountain work in North Carolina that an additional $4,000 per year for the poorest households increases educational attainment by 1 year at age 21 and reduces ever having been involved in a minor crime. With cash transfers, parents are also engaging in less destructive behavior themselves, such as addiction, and they engage in more positive impacts with their children. And data suggesting that an earned income tax credit increases academic test scores of children whose parents receive the benefit. So poverty has multiple levels of effect, but we also know that even with small amounts of income coming into a family, that can make actually a fairly dramatic effect on child health. Now, in and of itself, that may or may not be impactful, but it needs to be wrapped into building adult skills and adult capacity. So I just want to touch then briefly on community health and development and why we need to think about that as a system. So when we think about community design, how communities are, what are the factors in a community that impact health? Think about all of these things. How economically vital a community is. How noisy, how stressful it might be with the crime rates. How connected or not is it? How dispersed are people? What are the environmental qualities? What are the ways that family or individuals can be physically active? Are there walking trails? Are there parks? Is there access to healthy food? Is there access to good housing? What about the roads? What about the traffic-related injury? Are there roads that are poor that further increase the risk for traffic problems? What about climate change and extreme weather conditions that might impact a given community? We think about community design and making healthy communities. These are the things that we need to think about. And we need to think about how these things that are at what you might think of as a macro level actually come down to impact adult capacity to care for children. If you're having to drive a long distance to get healthy food for your child and you have a choice between holding down 2 jobs and driving that distance, then the fact that healthy food is a distance away becomes an issue. It becomes a community issue. This is where I also want to talk about rural poverty. And as you can see on this slide, the purple line is small town rural poverty. These are 2012 rates again. And whereas central city poverty is starting potentially to trend downwards, rural poverty is trending upwards. At the very least, they're becoming quite close. And we have a number of children and families living in rural poverty, but in our own state, the majority of our state is rural poverty. These are rural communities where there are issues of access to healthy food, where there are issues of social isolation, where there are issues of great economic disparity, where there are issues of economic depression in the community itself. Our state is a predominantly rural state, which makes for our community design that we think of in a different way than one might think of in an urban center, and requires us to be a bit more innovative. I briefly want to tell you then about Discover Together, which is a project we're doing in Grundy County, and one that some of you may have heard about. Discover Together is a multi-focused project, and it has multiple partners, including scholastic publishers, the University of the South, and our community partners in Grundy. The focus of Scholastic was to promote community connectedness through literacy. And what we mean by that, and we do that through a camp, a parent co-op, and after-school program. But what we mean by promoting community connectedness is encouraging individuals' sense of their community, of their place, building social connectedness, getting them together, and doing that through teaching children about the place they live in, and teaching children about how they tell stories about their place and celebrate their place. We've seen an increasing investment of families in the community and vice versa. We've seen the community start to come together and invest in how they think with each other about their community. So I want to go back now to this schematic, because what I've said is that thinking about the individual child and family, which is where many of us are comfortable in this circle, requires that we think more broadly about a system and how we can be innovative. And where do we start? So this is the challenge I want to put forward to you. What will it take? Well, obviously it will take will, commitment, and resources. I think we all know that. But it will be most important that we take the long view and not the short view. The long view is that we are investing now for the next generation. We are investing now in young children to help them when they become parents. There are short-term gains that we can focus on, and we need to be able to think of what are those short-term gains so that we can inform our policy colleagues. But we also need to take the long-term view. We need to coordinate across agencies. When you're talking about schools and healthcare and economic development and community development, we need to coordinate across agencies, and we need to have a coordinated data network. That's something actually that can be quite a challenge. How do you link school data with health data? How do you link family welfare data with health data? Knowing those things, bringing those together, actually allows us to be able to track families across systems, but also see how systems interact and impact one another. Embedding services in one location, such as the Moms Partnership that I described for you. But it can be a school. It can be anywhere but one location where you come for your child's health, for your child's enrollment in school, for job training, a variety of things, one location. Collaboration with researchers, and that will become clearer in just a moment. Strong political advocacy, and then what I would call an innovation frame of mind. So I want to end on an innovation frame of mind. And this is from my colleagues at the Center on the Developing Child and the Frontiers of Innovation. An innovation of frame of mind is this, in a nutshell. You try something, you see if it works, and it's a short cycle. And if it doesn't work, you don't abandon, you learn why did it not work, and then make those changes and try again. So it's constantly iterating, constantly designing, getting information about how something worked. Try it in one school or one community center, what worked, what didn't, then try it again somewhere else, making those changes. It's an innovation cycle, a very short cycle. We oftentimes, particularly in the academic world, put things in place and we let them play out for several years to see if they worked or didn't. In this frame of mind, we're trying things, being bold to try a few things. If they don't work, if bringing this system together with that one didn't work quite as well, figure out why and try something else. The other part from my colleagues' thinking is that we model what they call an innovation cluster, where you bring researchers, community members, investors, those delivering the interventions, policymakers, all in a hub, all together, all in a think tank, whether physically so or virtually so, but probably being in the same room sometimes is really important. And in some ways you can think of these meetings that you're engaging in as the beginnings of a kind of innovation cluster. Again, typically we do this serially. We design something, we then talk about how we're going to pay for it, we then talk about how we're going to study it, and then we might see if we can get that policy change to make it happen. This brings people together, shared language, shared vision to agree to take some risks, to create together, and again, learning in this very short cycle way. The key elements that our Frontiers of Innovation colleagues have underscored is co-creation, with all these people together, building something together, identifying exactly how you think this intervention or this prevention will work, and testing it exactly for that. Pay special attention to what works for whom, because it might not work for everyone. So what works especially for this group and what works especially for this group, and design things that are much more targeted. And a learning network is the idea that we learn together. You're not just waiting for the academics to bring the data as to whether the intervention worked, but everyone's learning together and changing as you go. And again, this innovation mindset, which is fail fast. Learn, even failure is good. Learn from your failure and constantly revisit how and why you think something is working. So I would say that there are opportunities in Tennessee. You are at the awareness stage. We've talked some now about the green boxes stage of trying to be innovative and create some solutions. And my challenge for us in Tennessee is, again, we are a primarily rural state. We have a lot of resources in our urban centers, but we are a rural state. And we have an opportunity to begin to think together about how to lead rural innovation, how to develop rural innovation clusters or hubs, how to bring together services that are around education, communities, health, workforce development, individual interventions in these rural sites, be they in one place or clusters of counties together. Rural innovation is different from urban, and we as a rural state really have the opportunity to lead the way in creating these innovation hubs. There's much to be done here, but there's much promise for our children if we can bring this together. Awareness is the first stage. Now let's be innovative together. And I want to thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to join you virtually, I look forward to being able to join you in person. I look forward to being able to see spring and summer in my home state, my taproot, the place that I call really, really home. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you.